You're 7 years old. You've just been ripped from your mother's arms by men in red cloaks. She doesn't scream. She doesn't beg them to stop. She hands you over with a face carved from stone, because in this place, loving your child too much is treason against the state. They march you to a building that smells of sweat and fear. This is your new home. You'll sleep on reeds you gathered yourself. You'll eat just enough to stay alive. And tomorrow, they'll teach you that the difference between honor and shame isn't whether you steal, it's whether you get caught. This is Sparta, and you belong to them now. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world right now, drop a comment and let me know where you are. It genuinely amazes me that a story this dark from over 2,000 years ago still reaches people across every continent. We remember Sparta for the warriors, the 300 who held Thermopylae, the red cloaks and lambda shields, the discipline that made them legends. But we've sanitized the truth. We've turned horror into heroism. Because the Spartan war machine didn't begin with battle tactics or training drills, it began in bedrooms where the state decided who would sleep with whom. It continued at birth, where committees of old men inspected babies like livestock and discarded the ones that didn't meet specifications. It intensified at age 7, when childhood ended and indoctrination began. And it culminated in something so dark that even other Greeks who weren't exactly squeamish about violence spoke of it in whispers. The Spartans didn't raise soldiers, they engineered them, and the cost of that engineering was everything that makes us human. Let me take you back to where it really started. Not on a battlefield, in a room where magistrates sat with scrolls, tracking bloodlines like breeders track racehorses. You're 20 years old maybe. You've survived the egoge, the brutal training system that's defined every moment of your life since you were 7. You've proven yourself strong, obedient, capable. And now the state has decided it's time for you to reproduce. You have no say in the matter. The magistrates, the gerents, have been watching you since childhood. They know your father's battle record, your grandfather's achievements, your uncle's performance in combat. They've done the same calculation for the women. Wide hips for easier childbirth, athletic build indicating health and endurance. Symmetrical features suggesting genetic fitness. This isn't about love. It isn't even about desire. It's about optimization. When they inform you of your match, there's no courtship, no getting to know each other. You're assigned a wife the way you'd be assigned a weapon. And the wedding ceremony itself reveals the true nature of what's happening. You stage a kidnapping, dragging your bride away in a ritualized abduction. Her head is shaved, her body is dressed in men's clothing. You consummate the marriage in darkness and leave before dawn, returning to your barracks. The strangeness isn't accidental. It's designed to prevent attachment. Because the Spartans understood something that would horrify us. Love is a competing loyalty. A man who loves his wife might hesitate before throwing himself into battle. A man who barely knows his wife, who sees her only in brief, furtive encounters, will march to his death without looking back. But the system went further, much further. Imagine your wife hasn't conceived, or maybe she's given birth to weak children, sickly infants, who didn't pass the state's inspection. Meanwhile, across the city, there's another woman, strong, healthy, excellent bloodline, but she's married to someone else. In any other Greek city, you'd be bound by marriage law and social convention. But this is Sparta, where traditional morality has been rewritten according to a more fundamental priority, producing superior warriors. The state arranges for you to sleep with that other man's wife. Not secretly, not shamefully, openly with permission, sometimes with encouragement. This isn't about passion, it's breeding protocol. The husband whose wife is borrowed often consents, even approves, because a strong child, regardless of biological paternity, brings honor to his household and strength to Sparta. Think about what this does to the concept of family. Paternity becomes uncertain, fidelity becomes irrelevant. Children belong not to parents, but to the collective. The most intimate human relationship has been deliberately weakened, systematically undermined, because family loyalty might compete with state loyalty, and they cannot allow that competition. The women in this system occupy a strange place in history. Some modern writers want to portray Spartan women as empowered, as proto-feminists who enjoyed freedoms denied to women elsewhere in Greece. And there's partial truth there. Spartan women were educated, they owned property, they trained athletically, while women in Athens were kept in near total seclusion. But call it what it was, they were breeding stock given just enough freedom to optimize their biological function. They trained not for personal fulfillment, but to strengthen their bodies for childbirth. They learned to read and manage estates because Spartan men were always away at war, and someone needed to maintain the household. They were fed well and encouraged to exercise because malnourished women produce malnourished children. It was efficient. It was logical. It was utterly dehumanizing. And these women internalized the ideology completely. They were taught from girlhood that their worth was measured by the quality of soldiers they produced. Mothers who gave birth to cowards were shamed. Mothers who gave birth to heroes were celebrated. The famous Spartan phrase, "return with your shield or on it," wasn't just warrior bravado. It was mothers telling sons that death was preferable to dishonor. Ancient sources tell us about a Spartan woman who killed her own son when she learned he'd fled from battle. Whether that story is literally true or propaganda doesn't really matter. What matters is that Spartans told it with approval, not horror. They had successfully replaced maternal instinct with fanatical patriotism. 9 months after that state-mandated coupling, your wife is in labor. In any normal society, birth is a moment of joy, of anticipation, of hope. But in Sparta, birth is just the beginning of evaluation. The baby emerges, takes its first breath, and immediately, before the mother can even hold it properly, the infant is taken away. Not to a nursery, to a committee, the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. These are the oldest, hardest men in Sparta. They've survived countless battles. They've watched friends die. They've killed, and now they're going to decide whether your newborn deserves to live. They unwrap the baby, turn it over, examine it with clinical detachment. Are the legs straight? Is the spine properly formed? Does it cry with appropriate vigor? Any deformity? Any perceived weakness? Any indication that this child might not become a functional soldier is a death sentence. This wasn't considered cruelty in Spartan logic. It was necessity. Sparta was a small warrior elite surrounded by enemies. They were vastly outnumbered by the Helots, the enslaved peoples who worked Spartan land and hated their masters with every fiber of their being. Every Spartan citizen had to be a pillar of strength. A weak individual wasn't just a burden. It was a liability, a crack in the wall that enemies could exploit. So they eliminated weakness at the source, before it could consume resources, before it could compromise the collective. If the baby passed inspection, it was returned to the family, assigned a plot of land, welcomed not as a child, but as a future soldier. But if the verdict was negative, if the elders deemed it unfit, the process was chilling in its bureaucratic coldness. The infant was carried to Mount Taygetus, to a place called the Apotheti, literally the deposits, a deep chasm in the rock. And there the baby was left. No sword thrust, no merciful ending, just abandonment, left to exposure, to cold, to wild animals, a slow death, out of sight and out of mind. The Spartans didn't consider this murder. They considered it quality control. Returning defective material to nature, modern archaeologists have searched for evidence of the Apotheti. They've found remains at the base of cliffs near Sparta, bones of children and adults both. The historical reality is murkier than the legend. Some scholars now think the practice was exaggerated by Sparta's enemies or reserved for extreme cases rather than routine. But whether it happened to every weak infant or only some, the ideology behind it is undeniable. Spartan children had to earn the right to live, and surviving that first inspection was only the beginning. For 7 years, you're raised at home. But don't mistake this for a normal childhood. Spartan parents weren't encouraged to coddle their children. Mothers were taught to suppress tenderness, to treat their sons as state property on temporary loan. Fathers were mostly absent, living in military barracks even after marriage. And then, at age 7, the state came to collect its investment. The agogi, the word means upbringing, but that's like calling a meat grinder a food processor. Technically accurate, but missing the essential violence. One day, men arrive at your home. They're not there to visit, they're there to take you. Your mother doesn't fight them. She doesn't weep. She's been trained for this moment her entire life. She hands you over without protest, because protesting would mark her as weak as insufficiently devoted to Sparta. You're marched to a barracks. From this moment until you're 30 years old, this will be your home. Not a house, not a family dwelling, a military facility. You'll sleep on a bed of reeds. You gathered yourself from the river. You'll wear one thin tunic regardless of season, scorching summer or freezing winter. And you'll be hungry, constantly, deliberately hungry. The food rations are insufficient by design. This isn't an oversight or budget limitation, it's policy. They're keeping you on the edge of starvation for a reason, because hungry children are motivated children. And the eugenics has a lesson to teach you about solving that hunger. Steal, not as punishment, not as deviance, as curriculum. Spartan instructors didn't merely tolerate theft, they demanded it. Boys in the eugenics were deliberately underfed and expected to supplement their rations by sneaking into farms and homes at night. This wasn't about survival. It was training, stealth, reconnaissance, cunning, the ability to live off enemy land, skills a soldier would need behind enemy lines. But the punishment reveals the true psychology of the system. If you were caught stealing, you were savagely beaten, whipped until you collapsed, scars lasting a lifetime. You weren't punished for stealing. You were punished for failure, for being seen, for incompetence. The lesson was unmistakable. Morality wasn't about right or wrong, it was about success and failure. Actions carried no inherent virtue or vice, only outcomes mattered. If you succeeded, you were praised. If you failed, you were destroyed. This was the mindset of an apex predator. Rules were for the weak. Victory justified everything. A famous Spartan story captures this perfectly. A boy stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When questioned by his instructors, the fox began clawing and biting his stomach. Rather than reveal the theft, the boy stood silently while the animal disemboweled him. He died without a sound. The Spartans told this story with pride. To them, the child was an ideal someone who chose death over admitting failure. Physical suffering, however, was only one weapon. The real battlefield was psychological. Our word, laconic, meaning brief or clipped speech, comes from Laconia, the region around Sparta. That wasn't coincidence. Spartan boys were trained to treat language as a weapon. Instructors constantly questioned them, tricky, ambiguous questions designed to expose ignorance or hesitation. There were no correct answers, only traps. Any sign of uncertainty was punished immediately, sometimes with a sharp bite to the thumb, a lesson burned into flesh. Think before you speak. Every word had to be precise. Every response calculated. This created a culture of extreme verbal economy. Spartans became famous for their cutting brevity. When Philip of Macedon warned, "If I invade Laconia, I will destroy Sparta," the Spartans replied with a single word, "if." That wit was forged in a childhood where unnecessary syllables caused pain. But instructors weren't the greatest threat. The daily terror came from peers. The eugenics was a pyramid of abuse. Older boys, the arenas, held absolute power over younger ones. They were drill sergeants, wardens, and executioners rolled into one. They could demand answers, invent rules, and punish at will. Meals became interrogations. Questions weren't asked to learn, but to provoke failure. A slow response, a wrong word, a flicker of fear invited humiliation, violence, or isolation. This wasn't bullying as we understand it. It was institutionalized psychological warfare. Boys were trained to function under relentless pressure, to read weakness in others while never revealing their own. Paranoia was survival. Hypervigilance was normal. The boy sleeping beside you might fight next to you in battle, but today he was watching for a chance to hurt you. The result was men who were socially sharp but emotionally crippled. They could navigate hierarchies, deploy verbal knives, and read subtle cues, but they couldn't trust. Vulnerability was fatal. Emotional bonds were liabilities. Then came the ritual that sealed this conditioning, the festival at the altar of Artemis Orthia. This was not the gentle Artemis of later myth. In Sparta, she was Orthia, the harsh, upright goddess of survival. Cheese was placed on her altar. Boys were told to take it. Between them and the altar stood older youths with whips, real leather whips meant to tear flesh. To reach the prize, you had to run through pain. Avoidance was impossible. Endurance was everything. No screaming, no flinching, no tears. To show pain was to fail. The highest honor was to stand smiling under the lash. Plutarch claimed boys sometimes died during the ritual, still smiling, because death was preferable to weakness. By late adolescence, you were a weapon. Hunger, cold, and pain became background noise. Fear and emotion were suppressed. Morality was recalibrated to value only strength, obedience, and victory. But there was one final test, the darkest of all, the cryptia. This wasn't a military unit. It was secret police. To understand it, you must understand Spartan terror. Sparta was a tiny warrior elite, ruling over a vast enslaved population, the Helots, who outnumbered them, perhaps 10 to 1. These weren't foreigners. They were Greeks who remembered freedom, and they hated Sparta. The solution was terror constant, unpredictable terror. The most promising Agoge graduates were sent out alone, no armor, minimal food, only a dagger. Their orders: hide by day, move by night, and kill helots. Not randomly, but selectively. The strong, the confident, anyone who looked like a potential leader. Cut down the tall poppies, they said. Keep the population broken, leaderless, afraid. This was the final exam. Could you murder someone unarmed, in darkness, without rage or honor? Could you kill not for glory, but calculation? The state made it legal. Each year, the E4s formally declared war on the Helots. With that bureaucratic fiction, Helots became enemy combatants. Killing them was no longer murder, it was war. Atrocity legalized through paperwork. For 3 centuries, the system worked. Sparta dominated Greece. They crushed Athens. Their warriors were unmatched, but the machine had fatal flaws. First, demographics. Every Spartan death was catastrophic. Each warrior represented 30 years of investment, from birth inspection to brutal training. You couldn't replace them with conscripts. Wars bled them dry. Thermopylae wasn't just heroic, it erased 300 irreplaceable men. The population of full citizens collapsed from thousands to fewer than 1,000. Sparta was breeding itself into extinction. Second, rigidity. The Agoge produced flawless hoplites, but nothing else. Soldiers who executed doctrine perfectly, but couldn't innovate. Creativity was beaten out of them. Questioning was punished. As warfare evolved cavalry, maneuver, flexibility, Sparta stayed frozen. They were the perfect answer to an obsolete question. Then came disaster. 371 BCE. Leuctra, Thebes long considered inferior, faced Sparta. The Theban general Epaminondas broke every rule. He stacked his left flank 50 men deep and slammed it into Sparta's elite right wing. Spartan doctrine demanded rigidity. They didn't adapt, they couldn't. The phalanx shattered. The king died. 400 Spartans fell. For a city with perhaps 1,500 citizens left, it was apocalyptic. Worse than the numbers was the myth. Spartans didn't lose land battles. At Leuctra, that belief died. They never recovered. Allies defected, revolts erupted. Territory vanished. Within a generation, Sparta was a relic. By the Roman era, Sparta was a tourist attraction. Romans paid to watch ritual whippings at Artemis Orthia, once sacred, now spectacle. A civilization reduced to performance, because Sparta had built a system to perfect to survive. They eliminated weakness through infanticide, compassion through training, individuality through surveillance, love through family separation, morality through outcome worship, and in doing so, they eliminated adaptability, creativity, emotional investment in the future. They created the perfect warriors and a society incapable of being anything else. When brute toughness failed against cleverness, Sparta had no answer. The machine that was meant to last forever consumed itself. The Spartans forged the deadliest soldiers of the ancient world, but they paid for it with everything that makes life worth living. And in the end, even perfection wasn't enough to save them. They were the perfect soldiers, and perfection killed them.